Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
Morrow reporting in. I woke up in the back of a truck, hands and feet tied. My head was covered with a rough burlap. I could feel every bump like I was in a barrel rolling down a hill. I was angry, but my captors had been smart enough to keep my hands away from my tools. I felt around for something I could start sawing the ropes with. No joy. For a long while, I lay on my side and shifted my body, looking for something, anything, that was better than throwing myself out of the back of the truck and hoping whatever predator ruled this humid wasteland ate my ropes first. The temperature ran from hot to scorching and smothering me with humidity. I cannot recommend the burlap sack exfoliation technique. My face was being torn up every time I moved. I was not a happy woman. My captors would pay. I lost my composure and started slamming into the truck bed. I heard a window slide open behind my head. Hey, she's awake and moving, man. Should we dose her again? No way. We're nearly there. Let the boss figure her out. This man was in the driver's seat. Hey, there's a kid on a motorcycle! Jack! The driver let loose a stream of profanity. How is he not dead? Get a gun, take him out! I heard the passenger fire his weapon. My heart stopped with every shot. The motorcycle got closer. The kid on the motorcycle returned fire. The passenger screamed. He got my shoulder! He got my shoulder! Shut up! This kid has some serious mother issues. Stop grabbing me! Get the grenade! If you want to live, kill him! I can't see him! The motorcycle was right behind the truck, and then to the driver's side. Whatever was going on, the driver could not take his hands off the wheel. The motorcycle's engine got close. Something landed near my hands. I had to fumble for it, but I got my fingers on it. A knife. I scraped it against the ropes until they parted. My hands were free. Then my feet. I ripped off the burlap bag. I was in the back of a covered truck. The cover was rusted and broken. The truck old. I found my boots, coat, and hat piled in a corner. It was the work of a moment to feel like myself again. She's free! She's free! The driver and passenger freaked out, looking at me, looking at Jack coming up the side. I still had the knife in hand. The window was still open. I jammed the knife through the window into the chest of the driver. I was not thinking rationally. I should have threatened him or anything other than what I did. The wounds were light, but they caused him to lose composure. He slammed his feet on the accelerator and stared at the knife I drove into his chest. His friend, some dirty hippie, stared in horror. I had him in my eye. You're next! He screamed and abandoned the truck. I heard the crunch as he was caught under the wheels. His scream followed us in the final seconds. I saw a tree coming up, fast. I leapt out of the back, but too late. The ancient truck cover snapped free, and I was flung up with it. I lost consciousness. I woke up hurting, and just as angry as I had been before I was thrown from the truck. I pushed my way out of the bush that had caught the cover. Vines and tree trunks pressed against each other like snakes entwined. I was dirty before, but now, as I sweat, I shared in their dirt. It disgusted me. I needed to be clean. I had not taken more than a single long hot shower after our fight with the Aztec demon in the ruins. A helicopter passed overhead. That was as good of a waypoint as any. I had picked up my hat and followed it. This was deep jungle. I could not hear any civilization, nor see the glow or towers of some town or radio tower. My body ached, but as I moved, the pain fled. I wondered about the ancients and revenges plotted over the years. Were they better or worse people than us moderns? Who knew? Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, is not for active kidnapping and ritual sacrifice situations. I had that feeling. That building up of sweat along the back of my neck tingled in the right way. My heart trembled and felt sick. Something spiritual was happening. Soon, I saw the peak of a flat-topped temple rise up in the gaps of the forest. The temple was tall, but its wide base made it feel squat compared to a cathedral. It was a pile of rock, raised up to be close to the gods, but the only thing that could make it different from a hill was the carving on the sides. Demons squatted on bloody thrones. Feathered serpents gambled over bloody sacrifices. Skulls stacked on skulls and chains across lintels and mantles. Blocky expressions of agony observable even at my distance. Aztecs. I hate Aztecs. I had no clue where Jack was. I was unarmed. Jack's knife had flown off who knows where. I had no idea where the nearest road or city lay. I was tired, aching, and hungering for action. I sharpened myself, my will. I was ready to fight. The helicopter hovered over the temple altar. I watched a man climb down a rope ladder. I made a mental note to see if he was involved. The mental note is me being a paranormal Pinkerton and keeping something like scientific about my situation. I knew he was involved. Who else was there? And if he was not, God would not let me kill him. I stopped at that thought. I needed some water. I needed to slow down. I was going to run into the sacrificial altar that I was probably intended for without weapons or a plan. I breathed until I was ready to think through my actions. I walked through the jungle until I reached the edge of the clearing. The rising bushes, desperate to take back the man-made mountains for the cause of the jungle, gave me great cover. There were hundreds of people milling around. Photographers, maybe National Geographic, was running some sort of massive tribal photo shoot. What did this mean? Did they gather worshippers for some fake ritual? Fake for the readers, real for the souls of everyone here? The longer I looked, the worse it got. Why were these women in indecent tribal garments? Were they going to be publishing it? I kept out of the camera angles. I rated my priorities. I needed to figure out who had been helicoptered into the top. Kill him unless there was a reason not to. Find Jack. I did not know if I could interfere with the photographer's purpose, but it was nothing good. Sometimes they had the men and women chant in some language I could not recognize and dance in a line. Other times, they just stood there, waiting as the photographer took pictures of them. I heard voices nearby and flung myself into a crack at the base of the main pyramid, where the man had landed. 2 men ran by. I was hidden, for now. But how to reach the top? I needed a weapon. I needed Jack. I needed an edge. I could not retreat, not without abandoning whatever was going on here. I could not risk missing Jack. He was in the area, surely looking for me. I heard the voices again and backed deeper into the hole. They never left. They talked about where I might be, about Jack hunting them in the jungle, and about some VIP up above. Have I ever said I'm so proud of Jack? They're going to fear him when he's an adult. It's all I want for him, to be safe. You're safe if everyone is scared to cross you. You're safe if you can kill everything under the sun and the moon and the star-dark sky. Jack will be safe. I'll make sure of it, and I'll pay the cost of that fear in blood. Straining to hear my pursuers, I was not paying attention, and my foot broke through the ground beneath me. The rest of my hiding place collapsed and dragged me down in a scurry of shale of dirt. I could not breathe, being pelted by rocks and detritus of a 1,000-year-old pyramid. I could not open my eyes, and when I did, I could not see anything. I could breathe again when the pandemonium of dirt and stone stopped. I felt my way forward until I felt a wall of rough-cut stone. I could feel the blocky Aztec inscriptions up and down the rock face. Skulls on skulls, with snakes carved into their eye sockets. It may be shocking that I felt all that, but Aztec styles only have so many motifs. I walked forward, one hand on the wall. I could smell the dust of ages all around me. Disturbed, first by the rock slide, then by my steps. Hundreds of years went past before anyone had broken the solemnity of these halls. I felt things above me, in constant, wafting, but above my head. I heard the skittering of watching things that saw me in the dark, and then ran back into their holes. Once, my hand lost track of the wall, and a tongue lashed at my palm, cutting it. I ran to the opposite wall, and heard the depraved thing sigh in contentment. I walked on. I turned right, then right again. When I feared I was stuck in a massive rectangle, I was provided a ramp up. Then more turns, another ramp, up, and God grant me mercy, light. I was so light-starved, I ran to the beam of light and fell to my knees. Like someone telling you that it was mealtime, I did not know how hungry I was until the light came to me. I did not lose my senses, but I did not look around until I had gluttoned myself on light. I was in one of those millions of abattoirs of the Aztecs. Skeletons hung from the pegs in rows as far as the little bit of light could reach. Skeletons with their ribs snapped open so they resembled crab legs. Skulls cracked like eggshells. Whole limbs gone, leaving the stumps of them waving in the breeze of my coming. Some had clothes on, some in different styles. Enemy tribes of the Aztecs, while others looked European. Their skeletons were taller than the others and loomed over me, their black pit eyes never blinking, all looking at the pillar of light. In the light, I was a fly in amber. I trembled in fear. There was something more here. I was on holy ground. I prayed out loud for God's protection. The light gathered around me, and then, like little bubbles being blown from a child's toy, light touched certain skeletons. These were the skeletons with rags and armor of the Spanish. The light touched them and passed into the skeletons. There was a chattering of bones and teeth. Nothing moved, but motion moved through the dead that had absorbed the light bubbles. They could move. They were there. They were alive. One, dressed only in brown rags, spoke. The voice was stronger than any I heard in life. I did not hear the words, but I heard them. Little sister, you do well to pray for protection. You are on holy ground. This carnal house has absorbed the blood of 30 Christian men, Spaniards, and some converts of the Indians. Though only we few were sent down for your aid. Do not speak, lest the moment be lost. Your prayers have been answered, spoken and unspoken. Above me you will meet a man who hates the Lord God and all his works, and seeks the death of his servants wherever he finds them. The same demons that drank deep our lifeblood now treat with him, so they may break free and rule once more. The skeleton opposite the one in brown rags spoke. You must slay him without delay. There is no way out of this abattoir except by a ladder above, from which this light beam is sourced. You cannot avoid him. As if in answer to my unsaid question, the one in brown rags spoke. If he cannot have you, he will have one of the girls below playing at worshippers kidnapped, and her lifeblood splashed on the unholy ground. Death is here, and is ready to drink greedily. For the sake of the souls below, slay him. The second skeleton spoke. For the sake of defeating unrelenting evil, slay him. He must be brought to judgment before greater evil is wrought. To do this, you will need weapons. We do not have crossbow or arquebus for you, but good steel slays as well as any modern armament. Set your hand near my thigh and thrust it into the rocks." I did so. I felt cloth and brought out a cloth-covered sword. It shone in the light. It was 40 inches long and ended in a tip so sharp it cut me when I tested the edge. It was one-handed, with a thin wire-like basket over my knuckles, and a hilt of the same wires up an inch of the blade. It was light, almost as light as the fencing sabers Jack and I used to spar. The skeleton in rags spoke. "Little sister, do thrust your hand near my right hand and see what you find." I did so, and found a crucifix. Christ suffered on the cross so piously, I felt new shame that my sin had put him there. "As the blade will defend your body, the cross will defend your soul. It was our intention to break out of here, as from a prison. Instead, we were caught and slain. Our painful martyrdom is now your good grace. Go now, before some wickedness is performed, and Christ is blasphemed." The motion I could not see ended, and I was alone once more. I thanked God for his goodness and mercy to me. I climbed up the ramps until I found the ladder. By this distance, it was not a long climb. There was a hole hidden among the statues that lined the final platform of the flat-topped pyramid. I climbed up and into the open air. I stood behind an Asian man who harangued a set of shadows who faded in and out of sight. They were giants that stretched beyond the clouds, or were they merely tall? I could see their ornaments and regalia more than I could see their faces and bodies. I recognized the form of Tlatzoltol squatting at one end. At the other, a tall and proud warrior stood with his back straight. Others sat on thrones or strange orb-like things that reminded me of spaceships than chairs. Still more, smaller and weaker than the Titans, floated or phased in and out in the gaps of the air and light. I froze, not because I feared the Asian man, or the shadows of Aztec demon gods, but because of the feathery thing that lay coiled around the altar in front of the Asian man. It uncoiled itself as I stood tall. Its head merged snake and jaguar together in a grotesque snarl. Feathers bristled from behind the cat ears to fit its set of vestigial legs, which flopped when on the stone floor, but became rigid as the head rose into the air. The whole monstrosity was a maelstrom of red, yellow, and green. Its eyes were obsidian flints, but when light shone on them, they turned red as fresh blood. Its eyes burned with a life that never stopped thirsting for the tearing of hearts and the strangling of life. It was a feathered serpent, a Quetzalcoatl. It was an Aztec dragon. I did not freeze, but straightened myself. I planted the sword in a crack near my feet and took off my coat. I draped it around my shoulders like a cape and took the sword up again. My sword was in my right hand, the crucifix in my left. The Quetzalcoatl rose into the air on unseen strings. The Asian man turned. His mouth snarled with hatred. There was no disguise, no false, soft-mouthed politeness of the Japanese in him. I could see him as a samurai from older times. His hand was on a katana. The hilt held several dangling charms. He was dressed in a business suit. It was strange. All the shadows behind him in Aztec garb, myself in the remains of my detective outfit, and him in a salaryman's everyday wear. His shoes were impeccably shiny. Yet, despite the incongruity of his clothing to his purpose, his body was as tightly wound as a spring. His motion was smooth as silk, and his stance was martial, warlike. He bent like a flower bends in the wind and retains its beauty. He had fought many fights, and he had won them with his own hands. Around one wrist was a 108-ball Buddhist rosary that clicked as he moved. His English was perfect, and his accent would not have been out of place in St. Louis. So, the murderess of Yamadara Hana comes forth. Will you take her place? Come forward and take your own life. Kneel on the altar, woman, and slit your throat in the proper fashion so you have some dignity in death. You cannot comprehend the cost you have incurred, both in the slaying of my assassins and in the cruel drowning of the maiden Yamadara Hana. I threw my head back and shouted in defiance. I slew an Oni girl who was wholly given to wickedness and death. I did not know your assassins, but I take delight in God empowering me to deliver justice to evil and make them pay. I do not bother count how often I eat meals, and I do not count how often I slay the wicked. The Quetzalcoatl rose into the air, floating in an invisible stream. I braced myself. Its head, from crown to furry chin, was as tall as I was. The steel sword flashed in the sunlight. I felt energy enter my body. I would kill the dragon. I would kill the Asian man. I would jam the crucifix into the shadows and see what happens when holiness burns away the unholy. I heard steps behind me, and before I turned, I heard gunfire and a scream. Some corpse fell down the steps, rolling from the lip down to the bottom of the stairs. Jack ran up beside me. He was covered in cuts and bruises. He stunk to high heaven. He held an M4 in his hands, and a bandolier of magazines, and a belt of knives. At his hip, I could see a 1911. I nodded. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. The Asian man shouted, "Kill the boy!" The Quetzalcoatl rushed forward. Its snout slammed into Jack and took off with him into the sky. I caught sight of Jack slamming a knife into the Aztec dragon's nostril before I felt the bloodlust of the man at the altar. I grit my teeth and gave Jack to God. The man spoke to me with a cadence of a chant. I am Yukio Arakaki. My battle name among the yokai is Gatherer of the Dead. Shisha no Shushusha. I am the head director of the Ministry of Sacred Groves. Senaru Morisho. My designs will be accomplished over your corpse. You will perish and be forgotten. With that, he threw away his fine dress jacket and put his hand on his sword. With a swift motion, he drew it. He kicked away his dress shoes and advanced in bare feet. He was fast. I dodged out of the way of the swing by stepping to the side at the last moment. I thrust my sword at his face, but pulled back as I saw his body tense. His katana tip pointed to the ground, but without one thought for momentum or strength, he pulled back and up so that the tip would have caught my hip to shoulder. It cut my coat lapel. His sword was up to the side. The blade pointed to the sky. I saw my chance. I flung my jacket over his head and stabbed into the fabric. I struck him once, twice, 3 times, but I could not strike him deeply. His sword swung at me at each strike. Each swing cut too close, but clumsy. He kicked me and knocked me down. I got up and danced back while he was distracted. He flung the coat away. He pushed a finger into the wound at his shoulder. He grimaced as he twisted his finger. I was sloppy. He advanced faster. I dodged the best I could, only parrying when I saw a strike come nearer than my footwork would help me dodge. I looked for any opening. I kicked rocks in his face, aimed for the eyes, and played every other clean or dirty trick that I could imagine. I showed him the crucifix to no effect. He was just a man. I tried to use my sword to angle the sun into his eyes. Nothing. He was a machine. The wounds I planted on him bled, but they hit meat and nothing else. What could I do to defeat this tiger-like ferocity? He had all the advantages. He was shorter than Jack, but he was still bigger than me by about 3 inches, and his arms were longer. His stride outmatched mine. I had to take 2 steps for every one of his. He would outlast me in attrition. We were both battle-savvy. Neither of us wanted to die. Both of us wanted the other dead. I had faith that Jack was fighting the good fight against the Quetzalcoatl. I saw it flash through the jungle below, and then shot up into the sky. Jack had both feet planted on its lower lip, and his left hand on a knife jammed on the dragon's snout. He hip-fired the gun into the cat-like maw. There was no need to aim. The target filled his sight. I could not stare. Yukio Arakaki pressed his attack the second he knew my heart was caught on Jack's plight. I was a weak mother. He cut my left arm. Pain blinded me as I retreated. I stumbled over some ancient skull hundreds of years old in the haze of the pain. I kept my feet and my life, but the gash welled with blood. We danced around each other, but my left arm felt cold, lifeless. I saw one of the charms on his hilt glow blue. Not enough to slay you. If I had struck your breast, you would have perished of a frozen heart. Yukio growled. He pressed in again with another overhead cut. I jumped aside, sliding over the altar. His blow struck the stone, and sparks flew over our heads. The freezing got worse as I watched ice form in the wound. We were deep in the jungle. There couldn't have been any other ice for 100 miles. I saw the Quetzalcoatl writhe overhead. It flung its head, and Jack lost his grip. He flew through the air, but the dragon flew faster. It caught him in its mouth and swallowed. I screamed. A rational part of me knew the dragon had swallowed him whole. He could still be fighting. But another part of me demanded death for my failure. For a second, I lost focus again and lingered where I could have gotten space. Yukio took advantage. He leapt up onto the altar. He swung at neck height, but I ducked under, leaving a hawk of hair. I could not run while this close. I stabbed at his stomach, hoping to cut him open. He parried. He kicked me in the head, and I fell onto the carved flagstone. The Quetzalcoatl flew close. Both Yukio and I could hear gunfire from inside the beast. It writhed, slamming into the top of the pyramid, and then rolled off the side. The people below could not ignore the whole dragon falling onto them. The wreck of the beast missed me. Yukio stretched prone, struck by the tail. I risked it all. With my frozen arm near covered in ice, I put it on the line before the rest of my body. With all the weight I could muster, I caught his katana blade in the corner of the crucifix's gold crosspiece and trapped it on the ground. As I descended, I slid the sword into his chest between the ribs. His katana slid free, but it had no strength. I muttered a prayer, hoping that his heart was in the right place. I could not accept that he was merely a man. Then again, who knew? Evil work perverts God's designs. I jammed the sword deeper. He gasped. Yukio Arakaki's eyes blazed with hatred, and then the fire of his soul burnt out to nothing. I fell to my side. I needed to get to Jack. When I held my breath, I took the katana and rubbed the charms into my freezing arm. The charm next to the blue charm glowed red and melted the ice. Before the blood flowed freely, I made a tourniquet from the man's belt. I didn't know how badly I would bleed, but the less blood loss, the better. The Spanish sword was stuck between his ribs and the stonework. I had to leave it. I frisked Yukio's body, hoping for charms or papers or a first aid kit, but nothing. I left him up there for the demons to torment. I heard the mocking laughter of false gods echoing from the stones and the sky. I hated them, but they hated more, with every ounce of their existence. I felt lightheaded by the time I reached the bottom of the steps. The tourniquet did its best, but blood still trickled out of me. Jack first, then first aid. I found Jack staring up into the sky while surrounded by some of the native girls. He kept his eyes up and away from them. I couldn't blame them. Covered in blood over the body of the dragon he killed? He smiled with exhilaration. My son looked like he was enjoying himself, and it lit him up in ways I rarely saw. If I didn't do something soon, I might lose him to his admirers. My blood-covered son must have been catnip to the Aztec-descended girls. I found Jack's 1911 on the ground. I shot it into the sky, and the girls scattered. I hugged him. Blood and slime be damned. He was down to his jeans and boots, which weren't the ones I had bought for him. Where did he get that military machine gun? I pushed away the question. He could tell me later. Or not. I was very happy to see him alive, with the corpse of the dragon, and not any other way. I almost suggested that we carve out the Quetzalcoatl's heart, and he eat it. But I heard a no in my heart in the same tone I would use when young Jack would toddle towards a live power outlet with an outstretched knife. I brushed off some viscera from his hair and tried to get the blood off him. But raising my arms over my head to reach his hair was too much for my blood pressure to handle, and I nearly fell over. Between the two of us, we found a first aid kit and bound up my wound properly. Then we mugged the photographer for his Jeep's keys and drove out of there like the cartels were after us. We're safe now. I'm sure my silence has given you fits, Control, but we can talk about it later. Jack is out to get food and water, but when he returns, we're going to have to talk about Orion and Tom Morrow. It's not right to keep it from him. They're dead. They've been dead. We can't find their bodies. It happens to agents every year. I hope he understands. I don't know how else to handle it. Even though I had my doubts about them being alive, I never confronted Jack about it. I just let it fester. Let the two of us fight it out because it was easier to strike at him with my words than face their deaths and his sorrow. I hoped to rip out something of his I hated. Eat whatever part of him gives him the hope that his grandfather and his great-grandfather are still alive. It would have made me feel better. But that is wrong of me. I will put Jack first. Thank you for listening, Control. I hope we talk face-to-face soon. Morrow out.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. This episode was written by Ben Wheeler and performed by Celina Saucedo. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.